Breaking news, ladies. The Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship Program, Class of 2022, starts in January. If you are a women's health professional with an existing practice and you've struggled to incorporate fertility awareness charting into your client work, this is the program you've been waiting for. There's nothing like it offered anywhere. Transform your practice in 9 months. We start the first week of January. Apply now at fertilityfriday.com/FAMM live. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAMMLIVE. This is a Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 395. Welcome to the Fertility Friday podcast, your source for information about the Fertility Awareness Method and all things fertility. I'm your host, Lisa Hendrickson-Jack. I'm the author of The Fifth Vital Sign and the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Journal. I'm a certified fertility awareness educator and holistic reproductive health practitioner with nearly 20 years of experience teaching women to connect to their fifth vital sign through menstrual cycle charting, balancing hormonal health, and optimizing the menstrual cycle without hormones. I'm outspoken about hormonal birth control and its impact on fertility and overall health because you have the right to know how your body works and how artificial hormones disrupt that natural process. I host live coaching programs to help you achieve optimal fertility and health because it's important to have healthy menstrual cycles regardless of whether or not you want to have babies. I'm also a wife and mother of 2 beautiful boys. I know, I'm a busy girl, but I managed to fit it all in. This podcast is designed to empower you to take full control of your cycles, your fertility, and your overall health. And I'm so excited that you're here with us today. Today, I'm sharing a brand new episode in the FAMM Practitioner series. I'm sharing my episode with Dr. Jen Goldsmith. And in today's episode, Jen is sharing many of her personal takeaways, what she absolutely did not expect to discover when she started charting her own cycles, how it transformed the way that she looks at her own cycles, and also how it has changed the way that she's interacting with her clients and how she plans to incorporate this whole fifth vital sign fertility awareness tracking system into her professional practice. So before we jump in, I'll tell you a little bit about Jen. Dr. Jen Goldsmith is a prenatal and pediatric chiropractor serving families at her clinic, Lux Family Chiropractic in White Bear Lake, Minnesota. She is a graduate of the University of Wisconsin Madison, where she received her Bachelor's of Science in Dietetics before pursuing her Doctorate of Chiropractic at Northwestern Health Sciences University. Dr. Jen is Pediatric and Webster certified by the International Chiropractic Pediatric Association. She has a passion for working with growing families as they navigate their conception, pregnancy, and postpartum journeys. She is almost complete with her Fertility Awareness Method Practitioner training and is hopeful to continue her work with young women as they navigate understanding their cycles to unlock the next level of their health journey. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's episode with Dr. Jen. And I'm excited to be here today with Jenna. Jenna is one of the members of my FAMM program, so the Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship. And as we're recording this, we're just a couple weeks from the end of the program. So we've been together for about 6 to 7 months. And I'm thrilled to have her on the show. So welcome to the show, Jenna.
Thank you so much.
I'm excited that you're here. And so before we hit record, we were kind of chatting about, because of where we're at in the program, it's kind of like the culmination of, so the program involves, I would say, kind of 2 distinct parts, or maybe 3, but there's the part about learning all the things and applying it to your clients. But then there's also the part about learning all the things and applying it to yourself. And so maybe we could start there. So maybe let the listeners know kind of how you went into that process of kind of, so like the charting aspect of it and having to chart your own cycles and what you've learned.
Yes. So I think this has been like super beautiful because I truly took this program to get better acquainted with how to help my patients chart their cycles. And as part of the program, Lisa has us do our own. And it's just so funny because I'm like, oh, I'm healthy. Like I get my cycle every month. Like I don't have a crazy period pain. Like it'll all be good. And So it's been really eye-opening myself to start to like pull apart these pieces and start to see like, oh, like there's these things that are showing up in my cycle that actually could mean something else. And so it's been super fun to start to make some of these lifestyle changes and see those effects on my chart, and to feel like even if I thought my cycle was quote unquote healthy, like there's still things that could be causing some underlying issues as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I know that because before I launched the program, we had a couple calls and I was answering questions. And I think obviously when you're at the practitioner level and working with your own clients, you're not necessarily thinking about your own cycles. And I know my personal experience on my journey to become a fertility awareness educator, charting my cycles was absolutely part of my training. And it can be very humbling but I think it's an important part of the process, because I feel like it's like the shoemaker, like with the shoes that are broken or like not, right? Like it's important to have the experience of it. I think for practical purposes, like if you chart, you kind of know some of those challenges of how do you stick with it every day and what happens when I get really stressed, and going through that experience helps you to be empathetic with clients and helps you to be very supportive of them. But also the experience of like, oh, look at what's really going on here. And wow, my diet and exercise routines and all that really affects my cycle. I think it's really important to have personally to be able to be to be able to support people, because it's like, do as I say, not as I do, right? Like if you can't figure out your own cycle, it doesn't mean it's not about having a perfect cycle. It's literally about figuring out this relationship between your cycle and your health. If you can't figure that out for yourself, then objectively, how could you really be helping someone do that for themselves,
right.
You know?
Oh, for sure.
One of the things that you had said before, which was really interesting, was around diet and how you found it affecting your cycle. So it's not going to help anyone listening, but I'm going to share our screen so that you can see it. And so we have kind of your charts and cycles up. But I'll let you talk about one of the very first things that came up, I think, was around your luteal phase and some of the things that you were finding there and what that potentially meant about your diet and lifestyle and all that. So maybe share what your experience was of that.
Yes. So my luteal phase was really interesting because I don't know, in charting I was always like, oh, it's just about like ovulation, right? And then so being able to see like it broken up like this, I didn't realize like just how many days I was truly spotting before my period actually started. And so that was a huge indicator. And the way you kind of like go around things and helping us start to pull these things to the surface. I think another huge thing was I was having a lot of cervical mucus throughout my luteal phase. And kind of before I knew anything about charting, I mean, first of all, I probably didn't find out what cervical mucus was till, I don't know, maybe 3 years ago. Like I was one of those people that was like, I don't know, it's kind of weird. Like, hopefully I'm healthy. Like you just think it's maybe some kind of discharge. So I think starting to understand that like, oh my gosh, this is the part of a healthy cycle, but then realizing when you should be having those days of like healthy cervical mucus and that it shouldn't be extending throughout that luteal phase post ovulation. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, I think I've always had that, or maybe I just hadn't paid attention. So those are some of the few things that I saw on my charts that I was like, oh, this is interesting.
Well, and I feel like right now, I feel like we're like singling you out, right? But the reason that it's so important to go through this for yourself is because the pattern basically of challenges with the luteal phase are very, very common. Even a little while ago, I released a couple of episodes, one on the temperature regulation and one on the progesterone in the luteal phase, is essentially exactly what we're talking about now. And it's just very, very common, especially for busy women. So I feel like women of all ages, to be honest with you, but women who are in their 30s and early 40s, I feel like we're kind of at that. And that's kind of where I'm at and where you're at. And so we're busy in our careers. We have commitments to our family, to our friends, to our employers, or if we have our own businesses or practices. And then if we have children, like there's just so many different responsibilities. So we kind of fall into these patterns and habits. And so this is obviously one of the reasons that I love charting so much, because it really helps to bring us out of that into kind of like, I would say into like objective reality, which is that if you're having these signs, then it does mean that we should be looking at them.
Yeah.
One of the things, I think the very first thing that we talked about was It's often the very first thing that I talk about. One of the very first things we talked about was diet, and kind of asking the question of like, are you getting enough to eat to compensate for your exercise routine and things like that? And I know you have a very busy practice and obviously are amazing at what you do. And so what happens when we find ourselves in that position is we often put ourselves last and kind of forget to take care of ourselves. I feel like that was a theme that came up a couple of times.
Yeah, I definitely think that. I think, right, it's easy to just be like, oh, I'm busy. Like I have clients back to back to back. Like there's no time for me to like take care of myself or eat. I think I really started to notice like habits, like they just sometimes just like populate based on how your life is. And so I don't think I'd ever really like evaluated them for myself. So being able to like sit down and like you would ask some questions about like, like what my exercise routine looks like. And like, am I getting enough calories? I'm like, I don't know if I'm getting enough calories. Like I just eat food when I can. And I like hope it's okay. But I know like initially when I got out of school, before I was in practice, that I started to, it was kind of like, right, the people I was following, and it was intermittent fasting was a huge thing. And I like jumped on the bandwagon hard. Like some of my like role models at that time had been doing it. And I started to take like pride in not eating. And I didn't realize that that was a problem because I get to categorize it under intermittent fasting. I wouldn't eat in the morning and I would go work out over lunch. And then I wouldn't eat till I got back at like 2:00. And like, still again, I'm like, oh, I'm working out and I'm eating, but not with really like the right motivation behind what I'm choosing to put in my body. I used to do like 3-day fasts. I would do like fasted cardio. And I guess I never realized the toll it was taking in my body up until this year. And it was actually right before I started this program, I started hearing about how intermittent fasting wasn't done, or research wasn't done on cycling women. And I was like, wait, what? And then I'm like checking in with my body and I'm like, has my body liked this, or do I just take pride in not eating? Like to me, it actually got to a point, and like a lot of the stuff I've dove into myself is like, I think I actually had like disordered eating, and I got to categorize it as healthy because it was fasting. It was intermittent fasting and I didn't need to eat. And like, it got to the point where like, it was like a weakness if you had to like have a snack. And I don't know. I just reflecting back, I was like, wow, I didn't know I was like holding on to all of that until I actually like tracked like a day of food. And I was probably only getting a little over 1,000 calories and not a lot of protein. And so that was another huge component where I was like, something needs to change. And I kind of hung out in that area of, well, I know what I'm doing isn't working, but like really committing to the process of taking in more calories and finding areas to get more protein. And I finally, this is very super recent, like in the last few weeks, I've really dove into making sure like I am getting breakfast and like a full breakfast, not just the bar, like running out the door, eating before I'm having coffee, different things like that to start to support my body. And so I'm super excited now to see, since I've been charting, how that will change within my cycle and what those changes will actually start to reflect back to me. So
I just want to say like, it's so huge. It's a huge personal kind of revelation to be able to go through that and to, you know what I mean? To kind of reevaluate. Like I feel like since the last time we talked, because we had a couple hot seats and I feel like maybe it was a little while ago, maybe a month ago or something like that. But I feel like you came to all of this. I feel like you've been thinking hard about it and really came to some profound conclusions. And there's so much of what you said that I want to touch on. I remember though, when we were talking about it in one of your hot seats, one of the things that kind of came up was, because you're obviously busy and you have a practice and you're really committed to your clients, and it happens to all of us. Like I've been there. We forget to do things like schedule a lunch and schedule a breakfast. And so I'm not standing here perfect. I'm a human being. I threw my back out last year because I was working like 11 hours a day on my feet. You know what I mean? And like wasn't sitting down. So I'm not like, and I learned the hard way, right?
Yes.
My back spasmed out of control. So by no means am I standing here as a perfect person, because I am not. So we all go through this. But I do remember when we were having that conversation in the group, and I was kind of suggesting like, you're worth it. It's your business. You gotta, and you even said, you were like, I have staff members who take breaks and I watch them take breaks and I'm not taking a break. And so it's like, it's such an important reminder to just actually take that time to put ourselves on the calendar for our breakfast and our lunch, especially when you work for yourself. But I think what you also said that was really powerful was that, because you categorized it as fasting, and because fasting is quote good, that not having breakfast, and it was very convenient for you also because you do have a busy practice. So it was very convenient for you just to kind of go to work and work through all of your appointments and then do your workout or whatever. So it also worked, but obviously your hormones weren't loving it.
Right.
Yeah. So powerful. I feel like there was something else that I wanted to point out as well. Well, I actually had a question. So you had mentioned that you were following different people, and of course, like it's really obviously trending and things like that. Was it male influencers, female, or both?
Female. So these were like, even within like my like field of chiropractic, it was just like fasting was the thing and everyone was doing it. And it was to me this like, oh, I can do this. I can achieve this. And like, I was like a business owner, like, I'm like, yeah, I can do that. Like, so it was just this next like challenge for me. And then I got to a point where like, I lost my like appetite. And that was another thing is like, I was like, I wasn't hungry. And it was actually this past weekend, I was finally starting to realize what hunger felt like again. And because I'd get to a point where it was like, it like hurt, like my stomach would hurt because I was like that depleted and that hungry that my body was like crying out for like substance. And then when I was having just this underlying, I'm like, oh my gosh, what is that? And I was like, I think I'm hungry. And it was a very like, oh, okay, like this is coming back to you. And I can start to like trust and listen to my body again, because I think I got to a point where I just like was never hungry. So I was never eating. And I was like, well, my body's not hungry. Like maybe I'm just not hungry.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that came up a couple of times in our group, because it always does, is like caffeine and coffee and stuff like that. So I'm not sure if that was how big of a role that it played for you, but what I've noticed in my practice over the years, I'll let you share, but what I've noticed in my practice over the years, and I literally just came off of a call with a client she drank quite a bit of coffee, but then she had reduced to tea. And anyways, long story short, I've had a lot of clients who this is how we cope. So I feel like this is really how we cope with life. We have a lot of responsibilities and commitments. And eating can quote, get in the way of, right, of what we need to do. And so I feel like a lot of us kind of fall into that, drinking coffee for breakfast and then maybe like throughout the morning, and coffee is an appetite suppressant. So yes, when you drink coffee, it can help you to fast and suppress the hunger. And one other thing I'll mention is that, this was recently brought to my attention for, I don't remember exactly what reason, but if you fast and then you don't eat, or if you eat less in the day, over time, like your stomach responds to that. So your stomach kind of gets smaller. I don't know how much of a role that plays, but if you kind of eat way less food, you kind of have to build back up again to your normal level.
Yeah. No. And I would say like, you're dead on with the caffeine thing. And like, I would choose to do like lots of coffee throughout the morning, cups and cups and cups, because it would suppress my appetite. Right. And I wouldn't be hungry. I could make it to lunch or noon or 2 if I just had coffee in the morning. So I was doing it intentionally. Right. And again, categorizing it under this like intermittent fasting. This is good. Coffee's good, right?
It's got antioxidants, right? So it's good for you.
5 cups. Yeah.
Well, and so I feel like in terms of your goals and like your charting goals, so you were charting because it was part of the program, right? Right. At this moment in time, your goal was like, you weren't charting to get pregnant. You weren't like particularly charting for that kind of a goal. And what I find is that I feel like for many women, they kind of fall into it when there's a problem. So like if they're trying to get pregnant, all of a sudden it's like spotlight on the luteal phase. Why am I spotting? Why am I not getting pregnant? Like if you have an issue that all of a sudden comes out, then you're charting to figure out like what is going on. Why am I not able to sleep anymore or whatever? Why am I adrenal shot or whatever? So in a sense, it's great that you were able to kind of like not be goal oriented, not have a specific thing, but we're able to kind of figure this out at a time when there was no real pressure on you, I suppose.
Yeah. And I think a huge part of that is like, I have like a family history with a lot of women in my family, right? They have endometriosis, HPV. They've had a lot of issues with infertility. And so like having that in the back of my head of like, I'm a very proactive person. So like, I'm not just going to take that and be like, well, I'm going to struggle getting pregnant because I have no idea, but I wanted to be able to set myself up to be able to give myself the best odds of getting pregnant when I wanted to. And so I think one of those pieces was charting, right? And figuring out, and like, it's just been so eye-opening to me to like see this data come back to me like so rapidly. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is my body. Like I can do something about this. How empowering.
Yes. Well, I'm excited to kind of hear how it goes. One of the things that we were talking about today in our session was, so it's kind of like, now you're like, I got it. Like, this is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to eat protein. I'm going to do all these things. And it's like, how soon am I going to see the results on the chart?
Yes.
Can you give me a time frame? And so I feel like, again, this is why if you're in the field, and so of course we have women in the program who are not cycling for a variety of reasons. Currently, you know, some women, it's because they're past the cycling age and things like that. But I think it's still important for the women who are cycling, this is because then you experience those feelings. I feel that in your practice, it's going to be so powerful that you did have this experience where you you were under the impression that everything was great. But then when you started to chart, you realized that there was some things that could be room for improvement, I guess you could say. And being the personality type that you are, it's like, well, why are they not perfect? Like I need to sort this out. And I feel that's really good. I feel like the experience of doing it is so powerful because then when you have that client, you can totally relate. And again, it's not about you being sitting there saying, I have this perfect cycle. And so I'm going to teach you everything I know. It's kind of like, I've been there too. And it was really hard for me because XYZ and blah, 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 blah. So I feel like it just really, because this work, as you can tell, it's not the same as like going for an oil change. It's so personal and intimate, and it really touches on some of the most personal things. I mean, the way that we move, our exercise routines, our diet, or the way that we interact with our partners, like it really touches on so many of those personal aspects and like puts it out there right on the chart for us to critique when we're working with clients. So I think having that firsthand experience of like, oh, wow, this is different than I thought is really important from the practitioner standpoint of like understanding where your clients are coming from.
Yeah. And I think even like entering the program, I was using I would now consider more like rhythm method. It was like a device that like did temperature and predicted fertile window. And knowing what I know now, I was like, wow, like I was using that and I was like, well, I haven't been pregnant. So like, that's great. But I'm just so excited to have this on board too, to know that I'm also able to use it to know when I'm fertile and when I'm not fertile. That's been a huge win for me as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, so for the listener who's kind of like, okay, so she had spotting and she had some mucus in the luteal, just for anyone who doesn't know, can be a sign of lower progesterone because it's the progesterone that we need to stamp out the mucus production. I feel like you've really outlined basically what you did, but did you want to just for that listener who's kind of like, okay, I want to know what she did, like what what is she doing? Would you just, summarize basically what you learned and like what you've implemented to improve those luteals?
Yeah, I think a huge part of it that we talked about a lot is like the nutrition, but I think exercise, like I've never been asked like, are you taking in extra calories and protein when you work out? I was like, oh, are you supposed to do that? I don't know. And so that was a huge piece is like checking in with my body also of like what days will work well to exercise. And then also making sure I'm getting additional protein. So I do like a protein shake after my workout. As far as like food's been going, I had started eating breakfast and for me, it just started with like a bar, like a perfect bar. I was like, I just need to have something and get into the habit of like getting up and eating something. I couldn't throw like all this food in my mouth in the morning to start. And again, like I didn't have an appetite. So I really had to continue to kind of like train myself of like, okay, I get up and I'm going to eat something. And then getting to the point now where I'm like packing things for snacks for lunch. And it's crazy. I mean, I work for myself, but like I'm in charge of my schedule, right? So I can make breaks for myself to have food. And just realizing when I got to work, I realized I didn't even like need to make those breaks. They were there, but I just wasn't like putting it together that like I should have my snack ready to go. Like I have 2 minutes in between here. Let me grab like my little like beef stick and my little baby bell cheese. So I just was able to find quick, easy things for myself to make sure I was like staying energized. And I feel like I've seen a huge improvement, like just in energy, I think overall all day. And starting to feel that hunger come back now has been like a huge win for me. But I'd say like the nutrition aspect and really keying into my exercise too. And even if I am working out 3 to 4 days a week, like at least one of those days is like a yoga or stretching. And on my higher intensity days, I'm always making sure to implement more protein and more calories overall on those days too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's amazing. And I know on the one hand, I remember when I was doing questions and answers about the program, it's like, it's not just going to be like diet and lifestyle, right? Right. And it's because I know all that already, right? Like this is
Yes,
right.
that was major. Yes. Which is crazy to see that, right? Like, I'm like, okay, I changed lifestyle factors. And as a healthcare practitioner, I'm like, I know it, not, I know everything, but like, oh, I'm fine on that. Like, you don't need to teach me the basics, but I was like, actually diving into the basics, the way you approach it was so much different, right? Like, I feel like you're asking the different questions that are going to get like that better response. Like, we're not told that we need to be consuming like more calories than we're taking in, or like X amount of protein, and then actually applying it to your life. You're like, oh, like I'm actually doing none of these things. Like the quote unquote, what I thought was healthy is like not helping my body. Right.
Well, and I feel like this is like the whole thing. This is like my entire business. This is why I love the menstrual cycle. And this is why having the menstrual cycle as an objective tool to measure, a vital sign to actually measure, this is why it's helpful. Because I always say like I have all kinds of opinions, like everybody does, right? But I definitely do. But it's really not about my opinion. Like my opinion could be that coffee is the greatest thing and everyone should drink it all the time. But then when we look at the cycle and we actually see some of like what's actually happening, and I think one of the most valuable aspects of the cycle, and this doesn't stop, you are kind of at the beginning in a way, even though you have all these charts under your belt, you're kind of at the beginning
Yes.
of your experience here. Because what happens is it's not always like you're always on a journey, like until you go through menopause, which is your last period. Like this is a conversation that continues. It's not like we had this epiphany and then from now on, every cycle is going to be perfect. Every single thing is like, that's not how this works, right? So it's this conversation that you develop over time, but it's based in reality because it's based in what really happens and changes. And I think one of the biggest values of the cycle is not just what we're looking at right now, but it's how the cycle changes. So it's kind of like, again, it's not about my opinion. Like if you're eating enough and if everything's great, then your cycle is going to fall into normal parameters. If you're not, then when you add in those additional, like when you start eating breakfast and when you kind of lay back on the coffee a little bit and you kind of allow your appetite to emerge and kind of get into more of a homeostasis equilibrium type of situation, then it's what we see happen in a cycle or two. It's like if the spotting goes away, if the luteal phase lengthens, if we start to see more of a normal kind of dry pattern post-op, if your energy improves, if your sleep is better, really we're living in reality and we're looking at like, how do these things affect my cycle? And if it affects it in a positive way, I feel like that's what science really is. Cause it's like hypothesis, action, and then result. Like if I'm full of it and I don't know what I'm talking about, then the cycle won't get better.
Yeah. And it's amazing because it's so individual for each person, right? And like you get to live the experience or the experiment, right?
Yeah.
Of your body of like, okay, I'm going to change this. Like, what's going to happen? Will it affect this? So that's been, super cool to be able to do on myself.
Yeah. Yes. Well, and I just feel like, because in order for me to get here, I had to do that. And I've been doing that for all these years. It's kind of hard to teach it. It would be like me trying to teach you how to drive a standard by like, you know what I mean? By like describing it. Like you have to drive a standard. I don't know. Do you drive a standard car?
I also don't know what you mean by standard car.
Okay. So you don't drive a standard car. You know,
Probably
the cars that like don't, like you have to push the clutch and like, it's not just D,
like a
R.
stick.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So like, if you wanted to learn how to drive a stick, I can't just like tell you how to do it.
Right.
because
Correct.
each one is slightly different and like all of that. It's like a whole thing that you have to do in order to figure out how to do it.
Yes.
Similar, even just regular driving. And so I feel like that's what it is with the menstrual cycle. And then, yeah, so I'm really curious. I'll be checking in with you like in a couple of months. And like, I'm really curious to see your future charts and everything, because that's part of it as well. And so I have a very different perspective just because I've been charting for so long. So I've charted through my early 20s when I had like an uncontrolled thyroid issue and possible, maybe a little bit of PCOS. Like, I don't know if I'm on the spectrum. So my cycles were super long. I charted through that to resolving those issues, to getting into a pretty decent rhythm, to having 2 children, postpartum, to now being in my late 30s. So I feel like I have a different perspective because I have a different expectation. I don't expect every single cycle to be, quote, perfect.
Right.
I see the trends. And so I'm at the point now where if my cycle's a little off, if I have something that happens, luteal, I lose a day off the luteal phase, that's enough for me to be like, what did I do differently? And then I can kind of adjust and make sure I'm getting enough sleep. And so it's reminders for me. It's a constant life. It's not like I'm not obsessive about it, obviously, at this point, but it's like a gentle nudge, always in the right direction. And I hope that you'll get there, right?
Yes.
So, because it's not about I always try to say it, and it's hard when you're in the moment, but it's not about this perfect cycle situation, but it's about getting the cycle into those normal parameters and really discovering for you what it is that messes it up.
Yes. Oh, for sure. And I think, right. And we had talked about this earlier today, but like, I like make a change and I want to see that instant result. Right. And like realizing like it might take time, like, right. It probably took my body time to like look the way it does. But I think it's been good to work with you through, because otherwise I'm just like, why isn't it happening? I'm like, you started eating this way last week. Like, it's not that instant. You should know this better than anyone as a healthcare practitioner.
Well, yeah. And that's the interesting thing about cycles as well, because you have like, so for me, I have in a way, I have a lot of patience. Just jumping into today's episode with some exciting news to share. The Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship Program, Class of 2022, starts in January. If you've been searching for a practical way to incorporate fertility awareness cycle charting into your existing women's health practice, then this is the program you've been waiting for. The Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship is a 9-month training program that provides the necessary training to incorporate fertility awareness cycle charting into your existing practice. This program cuts out all of the fluff by combining the science with the practical application of charting and allows you to support your clients by monitoring their 5th vital sign in a standardized way. Transform your practice in 9 months. Apply now at fertilityfriday.com/FAMMlive. That's FAMMLIVE. fertilityfriday.com/FAMMlive. Now let's go ahead and jump back into today's episode. So for example, if you're working with a client that has kind of uncontrolled PCOS and you're trying to help her sort that out, uncontrolled PCOS looks like 40 to 50 to 60 day cycles. So that means one cycle is 2 months. So there's times in your practice where you have to have patience, because often when you hit the nail on the head, when you actually get the thing that is causing the majority of the problem, you can expect to see changes. Like you start to see changes pretty quick. It can be surprising, but the full kind of, for you, for example, you were eating that way for more than like a month.
Right.
Probably I don't know, at least a couple of years. I don't know. How long was it for you?
It was probably 4 years.
What?
Yeah.
4 years?
4 years.
Of no breakfast?
Correct.
Okay. Well, so with that in mind, this is new information. I never asked that question.
Yeah.
I should have asked it. But with that in mind, I mean, it's the body's amazing. So it's obviously not going to take like 4 years. I remember somebody told me however many years it took you to get yourself into this mess, you can expect that many months for it to get you out of it. So that, I don't know if that's a hard and fast, but even from that perspective, like once you start to organize it, the one great thing about the cycle is that it's not like you see nothing and then everything's amazing. So you don't go from 0 to 100. And if you're not seeing any improvement, you're probably not doing the right things or the things that are going to make the biggest difference. But you don't see the full unfolding of everything the first cycle. It usually takes 2 to 3, sometimes 3 to 4, depending on the issue that you're working on. So I guess the encouragement for you, Jenna, is, you're at the beginning, and I would suggest for you to like put an actual reminder in your calendar, like open your phone and like legitimately put a reminder for like 3 months from now or 4 months from now, and have that be the reminder to look over those 4 charts.
Yeah, I love that idea.
Yeah, because you can't see it now. It's too soon.
Yes.
So we're recording this in September. It's not going to come out in September. We're recording this in September. So you could put a reminder for like January.
Perfect.
And then in January, you get to go over those 4 charts. And that is when you'll be like, wow, because even though you'll be experiencing it and living it, it's not often and always that we pull them all out and actually look at how far we've come.
Yeah.
And that's what I get to do. And that's why it's so fun, right? Like, and that's what I'm always thinking in the back of my mind for my clients, and this is why we do that in class. And I kind of look through the charts and like look at the trends, because ultimately that is the value of charting. It's like the power.
Yeah. It's the zoom out, I think, that I need more practice on.
Yeah. But it comes with time. You won't have that today because, right, you're still in the middle of it, and that's okay, but you will have it in the future. So, well, oh my goodness. I mean, I feel like we could talk about all these things for so long, but I'm so glad that you came on the show and that you shared your experience. I feel like it's so powerful, even just to the realizations that you came to about how your eating was affecting your cycle and everything. So one question I wanted to ask you on a different note is, now that you've gone through this process, because this wasn't the only thing that you were doing,
right?
You've also been working with, clients in the practical aspects of things and everything. So just from your experience and where you're at now, how do you feel that it's going to impact your practice, or how has it impacted your practice already?
Yeah, I think it's really eye-opening, and I'm always looking for right, like more parameters from which to look at the health of my patients. And so I think this will be a huge factor going forward. I already am working with a lot of clients who are actively trying to conceive. And so I think working through this and seeing what's happening at these levels, or even people that aren't, they're coming off postpartum. But I just feel like it gives me so much more knowledge of what's going on with their health from a different perspective. I was like, I'm a chiropractor, so I'm looking at the spine, I'm looking at the nervous system and seeing how it's functioning, but truly being able to see like how their body is doing on like a day-to-day or month-to-month basis, I think is so key. And seeing myself go through it, and just knowing that there's probably so many more people out there that are looking for this type of guidance, and being able to help support them. So
awesome. That's exciting and super fun. I know one of the kind of questions on one of the assignments is kind of like how, because it, as a chiropractor, you have appointments and you have a way of working with people. And so I'm excited to see the creative ways that all of the graduates of the program are able to incorporate it. But with that said, from a practical standpoint, I do feel strongly that just having this knowledge, it causes you to kind of look at your female patients differently in that sense. And with my work, I don't have to know what it's like to work with someone and not know what's happening in their cycle, because that's all I do. But I always find it I couldn't imagine what it would be like to not know what's going on in their cycle, because there's just so much to know that you don't really get from, unless you're going to do all these like blood tests all the time. The irony is that charting can kind of, like, blood tests are always useful and all of those things and all of those tools. But ironically, with the chart, as you can see, and as you've experienced, like, I didn't need to do a blood draw on you to know that you probably needed to do things to boost your progesterone.
Yes.
And I also didn't need to do a blood draw on you to know if it's improving. That's the interesting thing.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I think it's been interesting, like working with my patients the last few months and being like, I've been starting to just ask more questions about their cycles. And it's been like so eye-opening. I'm like, what? You're only bleeding for a day and a half, and I'm not trying to respond that way, but in the back of my head, I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to see your charts. And so I'm really excited for what's to come. I do not have anything figured out super like solidly yet of how I'm going to incorporate it, but I just know that there is so much out there for me to figure out and help support my patients with. So
awesome. Well, and one last question. So for someone who tuned into this episode because they were like, I'm thinking about doing this, but I don't know how it's going to work in my practice, and I don't know what it's going to be like in this program, what, if anything, would you want that person to know?
Yeah, I think that's exactly how I started looking into it. I think I'd emailed Lisa about like, I'm a chiropractor, like I have no idea how I'm going to implement this in my practice, but just like the reassurance of knowing like it's my practice and I get to figure out how I want to do it. I think I don't have it figured out, but I feel such a drive to be able to help more women figure out their cycles, and being able to do that through charting just gives me, right, all the information that's coming at them from that month to month basis. And I think Lisa said it really well, of like not having to send in for all these blood draws to know some of these things. And not that other blood draws wouldn't be necessary, but it kind of really gives you this like easy way into checking out what's actually happening on that hormonal level. So I would say like, go for it. I honestly have been super surprised with what I've gotten. I think I've gotten way more out of it than I thought I would. And specifically, you got to hear a lot about like my own journey and revelations. And I'm just hoping I can bring that to my clients as well.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for your kind words. It's been so much fun. This program has been incredible. All the women in the program have been amazing. I feel like we've also learned a lot from each other in the sense that it is a group of professionals. And so we've had, even today, I was asking our resident midwife questions about birth and things like that, because so that part has been really, really fun. And so I'm glad that you had a positive experience and learned a ton. And I'm really excited to see how you add this into your practice. And so before we go, can you tell the listeners a little bit about you and where you are in the world, where you practice, in case anyone wants to learn more about what you are doing, and if anyone happens to be in your area also?
Yes, I love that. So I go by Dr. Jen in the professional world. I'm a prenatal and pediatric chiropractor. And so I have a business called Lux Family Chiropractic, and I am in St. Paul, Minnesota. So for anyone in the Midwest, and I'm just about like 15 minutes north of St. Paul, so super close. But I work primarily with families. So I see a lot of people through their preconception, pregnancy, as well as supporting them postpartum. We have a super fun, upbeat office, and it's just super fun to help people kind of start to reclaim their lives and clear out their nervous systems and get them functioning the way they should. So yeah, if any of you are from St. Paul, Minnesota, you should look me up.
Amazing. I love chiropractic. I have a special place in my heart for chiropractors because there's been so many times when I needed to be put back together. And if you've never tried it, I think you should. So with that said, thank you so much for being on the show, and I will see you soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/395. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode with Dr. Jen. It was such a treat to have her on the show. Like I've said in previous installments of the series, I have just loved having the opportunity to interview the ladies in the program and have them share both their personal and professional experience. And I feel that Dr. Jen's experience and just her personal reflections on what she learned essentially from charting her cycle throughout the program, I feel that it really highlights and illustrates the power of tracking your cycles and the power of having an objective tool to be able to gauge your client's progress. And so what's really fantastic about being able to incorporate fertility awareness tracking into your practice is that you're then able to motivate your clients in completely different ways from my perspective, because this is something that we don't really look at. And even your clients who may already be charting their cycles, they may not be doing it in a systematic way, and they may not be able to glean as much information from it. And so as soon as you're able to really highlight it and look at it as a legitimate sign of fertility in a standardized way, then it really can bring some things to your attention. So I feel like this was a really great example of how you can think that everything's fine, but when you actually look at what's happening in the cycle, it can be telling you a different story. And when you really see that, oh my goodness, like my actions and my habits are really contributing to certain parameters in my cycle that I don't want, that can be the thing that really makes you think, oh, wow. So the way I approach it is usually not to say, okay, you need to make this change forever, but more as an experiment to say, okay, well, so we're seeing these parameters, they're not ideal. So why don't we try doing this, right? Why don't we try eating breakfast? Or why don't we try having one cycle without the caffeine? Or why don't we try, right? So looking at those things. And what I always say is if it's not making any difference, then we're not really going to see any changes in the cycle. But if it is making a difference, then that's when we're actually going to see things shift one way or the other. And so this is one of the powers, that you bring to the table when you're able to utilize the menstrual cycle as a vital sign, because it's not really then you saying, oh, I don't think you should do this or that or whatever. It's really the chart showing you what works and what doesn't, and encouraging you to keep looking if you're not seeing the results that you want to see right off the bat. So I hope that you enjoyed today's show. If you are thinking about joining us in the 2022 class of FAMM, the Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship Program, if you are a women's health professional with a thriving practice and you're wanting to incorporate this incredible tool into your offerings with clients, then head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAMMlive. So fertilityfriday.com/FAMMlive. Early bird registration is wrapping up this month. If you're tuning into this episode in real time, then you'll just want to head over and take a look. So with that said, I hope that you have a wonderful weekend whenever you're tuning into this show. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.